Hello everyone, this is Bob and Threadbare, and welcome back to Threadbare Reviews. Today's request comes from patron Shay-kun, who asked me to choose my own topic. As a matter of fact, a lot of patrons recently asked me to choose for myself, and so, instead of doing a whole bunch of Witcher books all in a row, I've decided to cover Blood of Elves next time, and for today's review I'll cover an old favorite of mine called The Ninth Gate. It's a Roman Polanski film that first came out in 1999. The story about the story. The film is an adaptation of a novel called The Club Dumas. It was written in 1993 by the Spanish author Arturo Pérez Reverte Gutiérrez. Pérez Reverte is mainly an author of historical fiction set at various points in Spanish history, and while The Club Dumas is a rare exception, it still plays to the author's strengths. It's all about old books and how they're authenticated and forged. And just to make things interesting, there's a crazy woman obsessed with the author Alexandre Dumas, and a crazy man obsessed with demonology, and a book titled Of the Nine Doors of the Kingdom of Shadows. Roman Polanski became aware of the novel when he read a screenplay adaptation by Enrique Urbizu. This got him to read the original book, and after that, he wrote his own adaptation, with collaboration from John Brown John. They emphasized the occult aspects of the novel and removed all references to Dumas, and so they also changed the title to that of the occult book, The Ninth Gate. Johnny Depp was Polanski's first choice as lead actor, and although he would later consider looking for an older actor for the middle-aged protagonist, Depp convinced him to stick with him, since he always wanted to work with Polanski. His employer is played by Frank Langella, an experienced actor who mainly appears in thrillers and political films, and the rest of the cast are mostly played by European actors. When The Ninth Gate came out, it took in $58.4 million on a $38 million budget, making it successful but not spectacular. Critical reviews were mixed to bad. For the most part, critics were expecting either an occult horror film or a fast-paced thriller, and The Ninth Gate turned out to be neither of those things. They also didn't like the protagonist, who is a terrible person and doesn't exactly go through a redemption arc. But as I said before, this movie is a personal favorite of mine, so now let me try to explain why. The review. Dean Corso is a rare book dealer and authenticator who works in New York City. One day, he's hired by a collector of occult books named Boris Balkan, who has obtained a copy of The Nine Gates of the Kingdom of Shadows. Only 3 copies of the book exist, and supposedly the author Aristide Torquia collaborated with Lucifer himself in writing it. However, Balkan was unable to summon the devil with it, and so he wants Corso to track down the other 2 copies in Europe and find the authentic volume. People start dying around Corso, and so he tries to back out, but Balkan doesn't let him go. So Corso goes to Europe and tracks down the other copies, and he eventually discovers that each copy has exactly 3 engravings that were supposedly drawn by Lucifer instead of Torquia. However, he is followed by possibly up to 3 factions. The first faction kills the owners, steals the engravings, and burns the copies. The second faction is a black man who tries to mug Corso and take his book, on orders from the book's original owner. And the third faction is an unnamed woman who fends off the black man and appears to have supernatural powers. The back end of the movie contains a few twists and turns, as any good neo-noir thriller should, but in the end, Corso alone is successful in summoning the devil. So that ending is one of the main reasons why I like The Ninth Gate. Evil wins. The devil wins. Corso's character arc is to become a worse person over the course of the film, and he is actively rewarded for doing so. Now, I'm not saying I would want this sort of thing to happen in real life, but I have to say it's a refreshing change of pace compared to most other films. Of course, it probably helps that, in this case, the forces of good aren't even in the running. Priests and nuns tend to show up in occult horror films, if not as protagonists, then at least in a support role, but in The Ninth Gate, there isn't a single one to be found. Some of the side characters are proper God-fearing Christians, but all of the factions fighting each other are either atheists or Satanists. And that is a pretty common trick when it comes to storytelling. When the protagonist is a bad person, you can still make the audience sympathize with him by making the antagonists even worse. Another thing that probably helped me appreciate the film is the fact that I had no preconceived notions about what kind of movie it would be. I wasn't expecting it to be a fast-paced thriller, and so when it turned out to be relatively slow and quiet, I wasn't disappointed. I also enjoyed the more intellectual and thoughtful approach it took, an approach that's particularly appropriate since the whole story is about avid readers and book collectors. I mean, why wouldn't it be thoughtful? Incidentally, if you're only familiar with Johnny Depp through his role as the flamboyant Captain Jack Sparrow, watching The Ninth Gate is going to be a real trip. Corso is as low-key as you can get without being wooden. So while I am aware that The Ninth Gate isn't to everyone's taste, and I'm aware of the checkered history of both the director and the lead actor, I still can't help but enjoy the film and its unusual approach to both the thriller genre and to the nature of good and evil. The analysis. Satanists do not worship Satan, and those that do have completely missed the point. Satan, or Lucifer, is the first rebel, the first person to question God's grand design and to challenge his authority. It stands to reason, then, that Satan would only bless those who are not only clever enough to solve his riddle, but independent enough to question all forms of authority, including his. One of the factions in the film is a Satanist cult, which formed soon after the author of The Nine Gates died, but which has had zero success in actually summoning Satan in all the hundreds of years of its existence. Several characters deride the cult for being nothing more than a bunch of rich people who dress up in silly robes and have orgies every year, and their members have never been clever enough to compare the books and identify the riddle. For his part, Balkan is clever, resourceful, and ruthless, but he is also a devout follower of Satan. He worships Satan, promises to serve him in exchange for power, and if we're talking about the Paradise Lost version of Satan, then that's not what he wants. Satan wants people to have no gods and no masters, to bow to no one, to serve only themselves, to follow his example and challenge authority instead of following it unquestioningly. And so while Balkan gets further than the Satanist cult, he also fails because he doesn't have Satan's interest. Corso does. Where Balkan is evil for the sake of being evil, for the sake of Satan, Corso is amoral for his own sake. He still lives in a society, and so other people influence his actions and decisions, but he never follows orders without questioning them. This is especially clear when he teams up with the Mystery Woman. While she's mostly content to let Corso take the lead, she is testing him after all, she occasionally makes a decision for him, either because there's no time for a debate, or because Corso is about to make a mistake. But every time she does so, he always asks her why. And that is exactly the attitude Satan is looking for. Thanks for joining me again for today's Threadbare review, and I hope I'll see you next time. Until then, please remember to like, share, and subscribe, and if you have a little extra money to spare, you can support me on Patreon. Link in the description.